In the heart of Archelios Station, time moved like a current, dragging millions of beings forward with relentless indifference. Every hour, thousands of ships arrived and departed. Traders haggled, tourists wandered, engineers repaired, and soldiers scanned. Lights flashed advertisements in dozens of languages, and overhead announcements droned endlessly. No one stopped. No one listened. Especially not to the sound of a child crying. She sat curled beside a thick alloy support beam near the central plaza, her knees pulled to her chest, small shoulders trembling. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft blend of pearlescent hues fading in and out like a dying pulse. Bioluminescent tears ran down her cheeks, leaving faint glowing streaks that dried into nothing. Her clothes, if they could be called that, were patchworks of thermal fiber and travel rags. Her eyes, wide and full of something more ancient than fear, scanned the crowd as if still hoping. They passed her like water flowing around a stone. A man in a gray uniform saw her, paused for half a second, then veered right. A tall insectoid trader clicked its mandibles and gestured for its younglings to look away. A human woman glanced down, hesitated, then turned back to her hollow display and kept walking. A food vendor pushed his hovercart past her, and the child flinched at the mechanical hum. Not one person stopped. Not one soul knelt down to ask. A small group of children ran past her, chasing a floating game orb, laughing in 3 different dialects. One of them, a boy, slowed as he passed her, his eyes narrowing. She looked up. For a moment, the noise receded, the lights seemed to dim. He opened his mouth. His friend called him, and he blinked, turned, and ran off without a word. Her shoulders sagged. A soft sob slipped through her lips again. Above her, a rotating billboard advertised security upgrades with smiling alien officers and glowing shields. Your safety. Your future. Always watched. A surveillance drone buzzed by, its lenses flicking to the side. It scanned her, paused, and labeled her status in its feed. Non-threat / unclassified / non-interference. The drone moved on. She tried to speak once, her voice choked and weak, reaching for a passerby's sleeve. The man pulled his arm away sharply, muttering something under his breath about beggars and biorisks. She recoiled as if struck. Her sobbing resumed, softer now, almost rhythmic, each breath a plea the universe ignored. The plaza wasn't silent, but around her, an invisible silence grew. No one acknowledged it. It was the kind of silence formed not from absence of sound, but from intentional omission, something people edited from their minds so they could keep walking. Compassion had become friction. Stopping for others was a luxury no one afforded. A cleaning bot rolled by. It beeped an alert at her presence, and changed direction to avoid interaction. Behind her, an announcement rang out. Shuttle 49G to Elter Sector now boarding. Passengers, please proceed to Gate 7. She didn't move. She didn't seem to hear. Her eyes had glassed over. But her sobs hadn't stopped. Each one struck the air like a ripple, quiet, but echoing in layers. And then, the current of motion broke. From the west corridor came the slow, deliberate tap of a cane. Tap. 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 A man walked forward alone, cutting through the movement of the crowd as if he existed outside of it. He wore a long, well-worn jacket and a small calm device at his collar. His face was old, skin creased by time and experience, and over his eyes sat a dark visor, sleek and polished but clearly functional. The cane in his hand wasn't purely symbolic. He moved with practiced precision, counting steps, using subtle shifts in air pressure and sound feedback to navigate. His head turned slightly as he walked past the support beam. The crowd shifted around him, their flow disturbed by his slow pace, but no one challenged him. He stopped directly in front of the child, his posture alert but not aggressive. The cane stopped tapping. She noticed him only when he turned toward her fully. Her breath caught. She shrank back instinctively. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. For a long moment they stayed that way, her sitting on the cold floor, him standing with eyes that couldn't see but still seemed to notice. He tilted his head, as though hearing something others could not. Then, quietly, he spoke. His voice was low and textured, warm with something that had been missing from everyone else: attention. Why are you crying, little one? The child blinked. Her eyes widened, as if the words themselves were foreign. He waited. Not pressing. Just present. She didn't answer. Her hands clenched tighter around her legs, but she didn't look away. He stepped closer, kneeling carefully until he was level with her. From his pocket, he pulled a folded cloth, clean, plain. He held it out. She stared at it, unsure. Finally, cautiously, she reached forward, took it, and clutched it to her chest. I don't need to see your tears to know they matter, he said, more to the space around them than anyone in particular. A woman nearby slowed her pace, staring at the two of them. For the first time in hours, someone else noticed the child was even there. The blind man didn't care for the attention. He reached out a hand, stopping short of touching. May I sit with you? He asked. She nodded, small, nearly invisible. He sat. And just like that, the silence broke. Not the sound of engines or footsteps or robotic chatter, but the deeper silence, the one that had wrapped around her like a fog. His presence cracked it. She breathed in, shakily, and exhaled. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was different. The flow of the crowd continued around them. But something had shifted, almost imperceptibly. One man had stopped. One man had seen without seeing. And the child, for the first time since arriving on Ark Helios, was no longer alone. The man's name was Kale. He had arrived on Ark Helios station 3 days earlier, though no one had greeted him, and he hadn't expected anyone to. He traveled alone. Always had. His presence drew little attention, just another older human with outdated implants, a blind drifter past his prime. But that didn't matter to him. Kale wasn't here for crowds. He followed something quieter, something most had forgotten how to hear. Years ago, Kale had been part of an exploratory corps, venturing into the deeper folds of the galaxy. He wasn't a soldier, nor a scientist, but rather a kind of specialist, an empathic listener in a universe that had grown too loud to notice itself. He used his enhanced auditory implants and neural resonance tools to detect patterns, vibrations, and anomalies that conventional sensors ignored. What others called noise, Kale called voices. His implants had degraded. His equipment was old. The resonance nodes under his skin sparked only on occasion now, flickering like memories. Still, his instincts remained intact. And when he had stepped into the plaza that day, he had felt something different. Not a vibration. Not a signal. Something older. Something raw. The girl hadn't spoken much. He hadn't pressed her. Communication wasn't always verbal, especially not in distress. He knew how grief could silence language. He gave her time, sitting with a stillness that contrasted everything around them. In a place designed for speed, Kale's stillness carried weight. Eventually, she whispered a word. He didn't ask her to repeat it. Instead, he filed it away, its tone, its rhythm, the pain layered inside it. Her voice trembled, but Kale listened as if it were a song sung for the first and last time. Names followed. Fragments. Broken thoughts, pieced together with hesitation. A ship lost. A guardian dead. Coordinates no one had responded to. She'd wandered the station for 2 days. Her species wasn't listed in any of the central archives. Either they were newly discovered or purposely omitted. Neither was good. Kale asked simple questions. Not about her biology, not about where she came from, but about how she felt. What she needed. He asked like a friend. Like someone who didn't need anything in return. By the end of the first hour, she had stopped crying. Her hands still trembled, but she was breathing more evenly. She told him her name, Shai. She was 7 galactic cycles old, young by her species standards. Kale remembered the way she hesitated before saying it, as though it had become a burden rather than a gift. That told him more than any data skin could. Kale took her with him, not forcibly, not with commands, but with calm invitation. The security system didn't stop them. His identification badge had just enough clearance to pass through civilian zones. He led her to a resting module he had rented. It was small, but quiet. He warmed nutrient broth and offered her clean water. She sat on the cot, clutching the cloth he'd given her, not speaking much. He didn't fill the silence. He just sat nearby, alert but relaxed. It was how he worked. Space was survival. But survival required one thing above all else: presence. You could be armed to the teeth, trained in every tactic, but if you weren't truly present, you missed the moment everything changed. After she had eaten, Shai finally asked him something. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about help. She asked him why he had stopped. The question settled between them like gravity. He smiled softly. Because no one else did, he said. She tilted her head, as if trying to understand the logic. To her, it didn't make sense. The larger the station, the more beings, the greater the odds that someone would care. But she'd learned the opposite. Mass didn't equal meaning. Cale explained that people often stopped noticing things they couldn't categorize. They moved past anything that didn't match their expectations. To them, a crying alien child didn't register as important or safe. It was a risk, a question, an interruption. And that terrified them. But Cale had long since stopped being afraid of interruptions. He welcomed them. The unexpected was where truth lived. That night, he ran a diagnostic on her DNA using his portable node. It barely returned anything. The structure was unlike anything in the common records. Not dangerous, not aggressive, just different. That explained a lot. The system had ignored her not out of malice, but ignorance. If something couldn't be classified, it was often treated as invisible. He sent a query to his old network, encrypted, routed through civilian-safe relays. It was a small group of listeners like him, scattered across the stars. People who paid attention. The kind of people who still believed in rescue. Hours passed. Shai slept restlessly. Cale didn't. In the early morning cycle, a message came back. One of his contacts had heard of a signal near the Tharsis Drift, an uncharted sector beyond most trade lanes. A ship had gone silent there, 2 weeks ago. The timing matched Shai's story. The contact had attached a partial manifest, no names, just species tags and basic mission parameters. One tag matched Shai's genome. Barely. But enough. It wasn't confirmation. But it was hope. He didn't wake her yet. Instead, he made a plan. The drift wasn't safe. Piracy, gravitational anomalies, and decaying beacon networks made travel there unpredictable. Most crews refused those runs without hazard pay. But Cale had no crew. No one to convince. Just one girl asleep in the corner, and a sense of duty etched into every breath he took. Before the end of that cycle, he'd booked a shuttle to the edge of the Tharsis line. From there, he'd find a smaller hauler or rent passage on a smuggler's route. It wasn't ideal, but urgency mattered more than comfort. When Shai awoke, he explained the plan in simple terms. She didn't say much. But when he finished, she nodded. Cale packed only what he needed. He left a small message with the local port authority, buried in administrative channels, just in case. If something happened to him, they would at least know she existed. Most people waited for others to act. To Cale, that was the greatest failure. Action, even flawed, was better than apathy. He had no assurance this would work. But the moment he'd heard her crying, he made a decision, one that didn't need logic, proof, or reward. He was going to find whoever left her behind. And he was going to make sure the universe never ignored her again. The journey to the Tharsis Drift was dangerous, not just for its physical hazards, but for the isolation it demanded. Cale had been through worse routes, but never with a passenger who reminded him so much of what was lost. Shai remained quiet for most of the trip, her eyes watching the stars blur into lines, her thoughts elsewhere. Cale didn't interrupt. He focused on every signal, every navigation update, every fluctuation in the long-range scanner's rhythm. In the drift, even the smallest anomaly could mean catastrophe. But beneath the silence of the ship's hum, Kale listened to the deeper rhythm, Shai's presence, the unspoken trauma that lingered in her every breath. It was like a whisper no one else heard, a story etched not in words, but in the space between them. The outer edges of the Tharsis drift were marked by erratic gravitational patterns that disrupted standard AI navigation. Kale had to take over manually, a skill fewer and fewer pilots remembered. His hands were steady. His focus absolute. Every move was deliberate. If he made a mistake, there would be no second chance. And still, he pressed forward. Not because of duty or fame, but because someone had to. In the third quadrant of the drift, they picked up a faint signal. It wasn't strong, barely more than a pulse. Most would have dismissed it as static interference from the surrounding anomalies. But Kale had trained his senses to catch what others filtered out. He amplified it, broke it down, and cross-referenced the timing of its pulses. It was a distress code, archaic, but unmistakable. The type used by fringe species not registered in galactic databases. It matched the rough timing and origin of the last known transmission linked to Shai's people. That was enough. He changed course immediately, adjusting vector alignment to trace the signal's origin. As they neared the source, Kale's scanners picked up debris, metal fragments, scattered equipment, and the broken shell of what had once been a functioning exploration vessel. The ship had no active life signs, but that didn't mean no one had survived. Life signs could be shielded, buried, or malfunctioning. He maneuvered carefully, avoiding the minefield of broken structures. With minimal power, he docked alongside the wreck. Shai didn't speak. Her eyes told him she recognized the shape of the hull. Her hands tightened, not from fear, but memory. Kale boarded alone at first. He moved slowly, every step calculated. The air inside the derelict vessel was thin, stale, but not entirely gone. Emergency systems had failed, but the central logs were intact. He downloaded the logs into his pad and reviewed the last entries. Panic. Warnings. An attack, or perhaps a system overload. The data was fragmented. But one line stood out, a manifest log of surviving escape pods. Some had launched. Others had malfunctioned. One pod had ejected just seconds before the core destabilized. Kale traced its path based on trajectory estimations. It had landed on a nearby moon, uncharted and unmarked. Back aboard his ship, Kale informed Shai. She remained composed, but a faint tremor crossed her face. He set the course, the moon barely a few thousand kilometers from the wreck. Atmospheric conditions were harsh, but survivable. They landed with minimal power to avoid attracting attention. The surface was barren, marked by craters and sharp ridges. Kale activated his thermal scans and began searching. Within minutes, he located the pod. It was partially buried, the hatch forced open from within. Survival supplies had been used. That meant someone had been alive, at least for a while. They found the signs quickly, footprints leading to a nearby cave system, shallow but stable. Inside were remnants of shelter, blankets, wrappers, a makeshift heater. But no people. Just remnants and silence. Kale knew they were close. He scanned again, broadening the frequency range. A faint pulse came back, not mechanical, but biological. Something breathing, weak but real. He followed the signal deeper into the cavern until he found them. 2 survivors. Injured. Malnourished. One was an adult, barely conscious. The other, a child, younger than Shai. The adult's skin bore the same tone and texture as Shai's, same ridged features, same translucent eyes. She recognized him instantly. Her posture shifted, hands reaching out before her voice even formed. Kale stepped aside. Shai moved slowly, kneeling beside the figure. No translator was needed. The bond between them spoke louder than language. Kale provided emergency rations and administered medical stabilizers. The adult, likely a relative, managed to whisper one word before slipping into unconsciousness. "Thank you?" That was all. No explanation, no history, no grand revelation. Just gratitude. They didn't waste time. With careful maneuvering, Kale brought them all aboard and began the return sequence. His ship strained under the additional weight, and systems ran hotter than safe parameters, but they made it back to the edge of the drift without incident. Once there, he transmitted the survivors' vitals to the closest neutral outpost with medical capacity. They responded immediately. Non-affiliated species in distress were prioritized by some enclaves, and this one responded with surprising urgency. They arranged for a secure transport and medical escort. Within hours, a clean, efficient medical cruiser docked with Kale's ship. The survivors were transferred with care and precision. As they were taken aboard, Shai looked back. Her expression had shifted, not just relief, but understanding. In the span of a few cycles, her life had gone from forgotten to rescued, from abandoned to protected. Not by governments. Not by stations full of systems and rules. But by a single man who refused to ignore her. Kale stayed behind. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't ask for recognition. He had done what he came to do. The medical cruiser departed. He sat alone in the cockpit of his ship, adjusting systems back to normal, logging the journey in his own cryptic shorthand. No grand tale. Just coordinates, signal types, energy levels. What he had done didn't change the galaxy. But it changed everything for one child. And that, for him, was always enough. Kale didn't return to any station or settle into routine after the rescue. The galaxy had shifted, subtly but irreversibly. For most, the story was over, a lost child found, a people no longer forgotten. But for Kale, it had only begun to unfold. He knew how systems worked, how they buried inconvenient truths beneath bureaucracy. The survivors he delivered would be studied, documented, and, if left alone, eventually erased again under the guise of security protocols. Shai and the others weren't just individuals anymore, they were now subjects of interest. That was how the Galactic Concord labeled anomalies they couldn't categorize. Kale had no allegiance to the Concord or the Council. He was a relic, a blind pilot from a generation that believed in individuals over institutions. So he did what he always did, he followed the threads others ignored. Through encrypted relays and fringe communication bands, Kale listened. Reports came in fragmented, an anonymous alien species receiving medical containment, restricted communications, heavy escort. It was exactly as he'd feared. The survivors had been swept into a facility labeled protective quarantine, but the phrasing was intentionally vague. No external contact was allowed. Shai had vanished from every accessible registry. Her biometric code didn't even return pings on protected channels. Someone was erasing her. Kale initiated a dormant protocol from his mercenary days, an access request to a shadow archive maintained by rogue navigators and defected intelligence agents. It was unofficial, untraceable, and dangerous. But it yielded results. The archive revealed that Shai's species had been observed before, twice, to be exact, both times in disaster zones. Both encounters ended with complete site sterilization and sealed records. According to deep code annotations, her people had once demonstrated a type of resonance-based neural capability, an ability that defied standard definitions of telepathy or manipulation. It wasn't mind-reading. It was something deeper, empathic resonance strong enough to overwhelm structured thought. That explained the fear. To a bureaucratic order obsessed with control, Shai represented chaos. She was the embodiment of something unpredictable, something that couldn't be synthesized, sold, or silenced. Kale understood now why her pod had been allowed to drift. It hadn't been incompetence or oversight. It had been deliberate. They hadn't wanted a rescue. They'd hoped she'd vanish into the void. Kale couldn't allow that. He prepared his ship, stripped it of identifiers, and outfitted it with stealth plating from a salvaged wreck he'd once pulled from a black zone. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to cross into restricted space undetected. The coordinates he'd acquired from the Rogue Archive pointed to a hidden station near the galactic outer rim, a place called Agar Bastion. Officially, it didn't exist. But from the data leaks, it was a hub for processing biologically sensitive anomalies. He didn't plan a violent incursion. Kale had learned long ago that the best infiltrations were quiet ones. Systems had weak points, not just in metal and code, but in human assumptions. He arrived at the bastion under the guise of a damaged supply hauler transmitting a scrambled manifest. The station's automated security questioned him, flagged inconsistencies, and scanned his ship, but the outdated firmware in their diagnostic suite missed his overrides. He was cleared to dock. Inside, Agar Bastion was sterile and cold, staffed by technicians who barely looked up from their monitors. They were not villains, just workers fulfilling routines. That was what made it dangerous. There was no malice, only indifference. Kale moved with a calculated confidence, accessing terminals, inserting data bypass keys, unlocking corridor maps. He identified the sector housing Shai's containment room and timed the security cycles. The guards didn't expect intrusion. No one ever came for the anomalies. When he reached her, she was unconscious, suspended in an energy field designed to dampen neural activity. Her condition was stable, but the readings around her brain showed signs of interference, attempts to isolate the very resonance that made her unique. They hadn't succeeded, but they hadn't stopped trying. He disabled the field, administered a stimulant to reverse the sedation, and whispered her name. She opened her eyes slowly, registering his presence. There was no fear, just clarity. She knew he'd come. They moved quickly. Kale's override protocols triggered a false alarm in a separate sector, redirecting all active personnel. He led Shai through a maintenance duct to the outer hull, where his ship was waiting. But before departure, he accessed the Bastion's central data core. Not to destroy it, no. That would only delay their efforts. Instead, he copied it, encrypted it with quantum keys, and embedded the data across hundreds of decentralized relay points. If they tried to erase her again, her truth would scatter across the galaxy like starlight, impossible to retrieve or silence. Once aboard, Kale initiated a high-risk departure vector using gravitational slingshot protocols. The Bastion's defense grid failed to respond in time. Within minutes, they were out of tracking range. Shai remained quiet beside him, watching the stars. She had changed, grown more aware, more grounded. The resonance within her wasn't a weapon. It was a bridge, a way of feeling beyond barriers. Kale didn't need vision to sense it. He felt the calm she radiated now, the connection she offered. Not control, just presence. They didn't return to any known port. Instead, Kale took them to a rogue station buried inside an asteroid field, a haven for outcasts, exiles, and survivors. Here, no one asked questions. Here, Shai could choose her own direction. He arranged for her safety, for contact with others like her, if any existed. And then, as always, he prepared to leave. But before he did, Shai stopped him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and simply said, "You saw me. Not with eyes. Not with scans. But fully. Truly." And that acknowledgement, that recognition, meant more than any rescue. It was the kind of connection few ever shared. Kale didn't respond with words. He nodded once and turned to the stars. He had done what he always did, carried the forgotten, shielded the vulnerable, and left no soul behind just because others chose to ignore them. In a galaxy ruled by indifference, he remained a quiet answer to apathy. Not a savior. Just a man who refused to look away. Kale didn't linger in the sanctuary he delivered Shai to. He wasn't built for stillness or the comfort of closure. He lived in the in-between places, where policy ended and conscience began. News of what happened at Agar Bastion never reached public channels, but the underground networks lit up with whispers. Files encrypted with his signature began surfacing on free data relays. They exposed the suppression of resonance-based species, the cover-ups, and the long history of abandoned life pods written off as anomalies. Names, dates, biometric tags, undeniable proof. What they didn't say, but everyone suspected, was that one man had orchestrated the breach. It changed something. Not overnight, and not everywhere, but subtly and persistently. Some began asking questions at security councils, while others dug into archives that had long been sealed. A handful of junior operatives walked away from their contracts, citing ethical interference. And in the quiet corners of space, those like shy, empathic beings once hunted or ignored began to reach out to one another. Uncertainty still hung over them, but for the first time, so did connection. Cale received no thanks, no medals, and expected none. Recognition had always been irrelevant. What mattered was motion, doing what others wouldn't because they were afraid, or tired, or conditioned not to care. He returned to the star lanes, running odd transport jobs, taking non-aligned contracts that allowed him to move without scrutiny. But his focus had changed. He wasn't just carrying cargo anymore. He was carrying names, identities, truths that bureaucracies had tried to erase. He started cataloging them. Not in public archives but in a living record, a resonant map of encounters, species, and suppressed phenomena. He called it the Echo. Each entry was encoded with layered markers, subtle patterns that only those with similar resonance could decode. He didn't broadcast it. He let it spread slowly, carried by trust rather than signal. It was a new kind of network. Not digital, not structured, organic, empathic, decentralized. Over time, he began receiving anonymous pings from ships operating under rogue tags. They used fragments of his language, pieces of his code. He knew what that meant. Others were moving. Quietly. Independently. He wasn't the only one anymore. That mattered. Then something unexpected happened. A diplomatic envoy, traveling from a mid-course system, made an unscheduled detour and announced to a minor council assembly that a new species had formally requested observation rights, an early step toward alliance recognition. The species wasn't named officially, but Cale recognized the patterns embedded in their signal transmission. It was Shy's people. They had surfaced. What made it remarkable wasn't just the request, it was how the envoy delivered it. They carried no formal petition, no case files or historical proof. They simply broadcast a single phrase. "We were seen." The council didn't know what to do with that. It broke protocol. It defied structure. But something in it resonated, not with the systems, but with the individuals within them. After decades of conformity, someone had spoken in a new language, one of recognition without demand, identity without aggression. Cale, listening from a derelict satellite port, allowed himself a quiet smile. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't an end. But it was a crack in the wall. That's all he had ever aimed for. And the ripples continued. Not long after, a report surfaced of a mining crew that refused to evacuate an anomaly zone, claiming they had encountered a presence that felt like being understood. The lead miner had no explanation for why they stayed, only that leaving felt like betrayal. The company shut the site down, citing psychological interference. But the data lingered, unexplained. Elsewhere, a shipwreck was discovered on the edge of a black hole's tidal pull. The sole survivor, a technician with no formal training in telepathic defense, reported being pulled back from despair by what he described as a memory not his own, but offered to him. The account was dismissed by official channels. But in Cale's archive, the technician's biometric signal matched a resonance pattern previously catalogued from Shy's enclave. Cale never contacted her again. That wasn't his role. She was no longer lost, and he had no claim over her story. His path was always forward, always toward the next silence that needed breaking. One day, a message came to him, not a request, not a call for help. Just a name, encoded in his own system's earliest encryption key. He hadn't shared that code with anyone. It was hers. The name was of another, like her, stranded on a fringe moon cut off by magnetic storms. No coordinates, no plea. Just a name and a feeling embedded in the transmission, hope. He didn't hesitate. He recalibrated his course, bypassed navigational restrictions, and prepared for the journey. Not because it was urgent. Not because it was dramatic. But because it mattered. That was the legacy he left behind, not ships destroyed or empires toppled, but individuals restored. In a galaxy of noise, he was the one who listened. In systems of blindness, He was the one who saw, without sight. The universe kept moving. Systems rose, alliances fractured, technologies evolved. But beneath all of it, something else was growing, quietly, steadily. A current of awareness, a network of people who chose empathy over procedure, resonance over suppression. They didn't wear uniforms or carry flags. They didn't announce themselves. But they were out there now. Because once, a blind man heard a voice no one else would stop for. And because of that, an entire species found the courage to speak again. Somewhere in the void, between worlds not yet charted, Kale continued his flight, not as a savior, but as a reminder that the smallest acts, the quietest choices, can reshape the very architecture of destiny. And the galaxy would never ignore that kind of voice again.